My name is Bill Kenny, and I'm with Test My Pitch, and this is a webinar on feedback failures, where feedback goes off track and how to correct it. And our real goal today is to help you kind of understand the challenges around feedback and some potential remedies that we've seen out in the marketplace. And we've got a pretty robust agenda. We should have some time at the end for questions, and but we want to kind of get through several things, and then we'll certainly open the floor up. So I think probably the first thing here is just to come up with sort of a common definition for feedback, so we have some frame of reference. Maybe the easiest way to think of feedback is that it is an indicator, just like so many different gauges that we might use in our life. It either tells us about progress, it tells us about where we are, it gives us an indication of speed and direction, but it essentially gives us some indication that guides us in a way that helps us make decisions or gives us some kind of input. So feedback, from a person-to-person standpoint, very much acts the same way to give us that indicator of direction and speed. So thank you all so much for giving us so many great questions, and I just wanted to share a few of them, and we'll endeavor through this call to address many of the questions that did when you were registering. So just to kind of highlight these, some folks had questions about delivering feedback, others about not wanting to discourage the presenter or the student or the entrepreneur or the employee. Others wanted to make sure that the feedback was interpreted correctly, and also that a point of view wasn't necessarily imposed on an individual. Others were concerned about how do they use feedback to create stronger teams. And then finally, more of a kind of an operational thing, how do we coordinate and communicate feedback? So again, we'll endeavor either through the content to address these, and or at the end we'll come back to them just to make sure that we've taken care of all the questions. And again, to the extent we have time, we'll open up the floor for additional questions. So just a quick snapshot of me. My name is Bill Kenny, and again, I'm the founder of a company called Test My Pitch. It's our sixth startup, and in building this business, we've been around for, in building the business, we've been to well over 100 pitch events, and that's put us on university campuses. It's put us in corporate, really all around the country, and we've actually we do a fair amount, or beginning to do a fair amount internationally as well. There are a couple of disclaimers with this information. Number one is we don't know and see everything. We're not omnipotent in any way, but we'll do our best to relate our experiences to you today, and certainly we really look at dialogues like this as the beginning of a conversation, not necessarily the end. So we really encourage thoughts and questions afterwards, and more dialogue. Just a note for those who have joined, and thank you for joining us. We have asked that folks that are on the call put their phone on mute. There is some feedback we get if you don't do that. That would be really helpful if you could help us with that. So, and then the second disclaimer is there are several roles on the call. There are people on the call who are faculty at universities and in various educational institutions. There are folks who are in corporations and in a variety of roles, from innovation centers to executives within companies. Just, again, a quick note about putting your phone on mute. We can hear somebody shuffling paper. So if you are shuffling paper, that means your phone, and we can hear you, your phone's not on mute. And then the kind of the third role are people that run incubators and accelerators around the country. We have some folks in that role on board. So I say that so that you understand that when we're communicating about feedback, we may say the word entrepreneur, or we may say mentee or client or staff member, but essentially it's really what we're talking about today is the role between somebody who gives feedback and somebody who receives it. And they, obviously that those individuals are come in lots of different flavors. So getting into kind of the notion that really kicks us off here, and maybe the founding proposition or hypothesis for this content is our observation as we've traveled around has been that by far, just to a very large degree, the best feedback that ever happens in the marketplace is when somebody asks for money. And so, you might think of when somebody asks for investment is generally when an entrepreneur gets the best feedback. When an employee asks for a raise, it's usually when they get the best feedback. When a salesperson or a business owner asks for the business or asks a customer to buy something, is usually when they get really good product or service feedback. And really what we're trying to do today is to move from that place where the feedback is best when you ask for money to having it be much better before that. When you ask for money, your degree or your probability of success is much greater. And so we don't want to reserve that feedback or that good feedback for those moments, because then it's just far too, sometimes we only get one opportunity for that impression, and we want to make sure that it's very strong. So our agenda, very simple. We're going to go through what we see are the big three challenges in feedback and the delivery of feedback, and then talk about some solutions and certainly get into the question. So we're going to talk about feedback that's random and out of context. We're going to talk about feedback that's filtered and protected, and then we'll talk about sort of the process of delivering and receiving feedback effectively and how that currently is sort of, in many cases, in a challenge state. So let's talk about random and out of context feedback. The sort of the scenario that I want to sort of work us through here is sort of imagining anybody, someone in any sort of environment, from a corporation to an accelerator or an incubator or in a classroom, sharing an idea. They're standing up in front of, be it a group of peers, be it a group of judges, be it a working group of superiors or subordinates, but they're sharing an idea. Well, the normal condition we see happen is once they've done that, and once the event is over, essentially everybody leaves, and on the way out, maybe the person that shared their idea or the people that did catch one or two folks who can give them some sense of feedback. Maybe they're judges, maybe they're bosses or executives or whomever they are, but they grab a few of those folks' attention and they get some feedback. And more often than not, that feedback is superficial and it's out of context. And I don't mean this to be at all negative, but that's just the reality, is that the people that are often sharing that feedback don't understand clearly the purpose of what was being communicated or have the context to give it an evaluation. And then on the receiver side, the receiver quite often, if they get comments from one person, they'll have a hard time sort of prioritizing those comments in a way that the individual meant. And if they get comments from multiple people, again, oral comments, they have a hard time contextualizing that even more, because it's now you have multiple points of view and maybe multiple criteria or sets of criteria being used by these individuals, again, from their own perspective, from their own frame of reference. And the point here isn't that this is necessarily bad, but it's really very suboptimal, and the opportunity for misunderstanding and misdirection is certainly fairly great in this circumstance. And so, sort of imagining a situation where there are lots of, then we can have lots of directions that are being recommended. And again, that idea that quite often feedback is out of context really ends up being a challenge. So if you think of sort of the dashboard, the instruments on the dashboard of your car as being directive in terms of how to operate your motor vehicle, then you go a long way to sort of understanding how to contextualize feedback. Is that the instruments on your dashboard are giving you feedback, and so that's really helpful. And those don't help you in cooking a meal. They don't help you in riding your bike. They only help you in operating your car. And so the idea is that we have certain instruments that help us in certain objectives that we have. And we couple that with the idea of looking out the windshield. So between the instruments and the feedback we get by looking out the windshield, then we're generally a pretty good operator of our motor vehicle. And again, it takes all of these inputs in order to do it correctly. And so, the idea that we're going to just rely on feedback, or that we're going to just rely on, sort of our own knowledge and intellect and experience, it's really a combination of the two that allow us to do it really well. And as we sort of move forward and we put these pieces together, it's really the sort of assemblage of those elements that allow us to put sort of the whole puzzle together. And again, that context becomes very relevant. So when we think about sort of contextualizing this feedback, it's really about how do we create alignment, how do we communicate, and then how do we systematize? How do we make it within our organization, again, be it in the university setting or the education setting, the sort of innovation accelerator and incubator space, or in the corporation, how do we systematize it so we're indifferent as to who's giving feedback because they're following a common methodology, both in terms of the delivery and in terms of the reception and use of that feedback. And so, ultimately, we see a lot of disconnection as we go through different programs in terms of sort of how it's really an execution issue, not necessarily a feedback issue. And we'll chat just a little bit more about that in a few minutes. So the second issue that we've seen is that feedback is often sort of filtered and protected. And what I mean by that is, when we really look at this issue, and it's, it's interesting as we've traveled around, one of the things we've heard periodically, and enough to be a concern, is that some folks have told us that they think feedback can be bad. In other words, that some feedback is better than others. And I guess from our standpoint, we're really going to challenge that assertion. And from our standpoint, is feedback is perfect. It's all perfect. And if we come from the standpoint that the deliverer of the feedback, and we're going to make an assumption here. The assumption is that the people in any sort of professionalized program, again, be that a university or an accelerator, incubator, or a corporation, have positive intent in mind. In other words, they have good in their hearts. Then feedback is ultimately just their point of view. And so their point of view is their point of view. It can only be, it is perfect from their perspective. And it's where we really see the disconnect here is how the receiver uses that information, how they react to it. And this is really where, in our view, the challenge exists. And it's really about how do we use that point of view or not to move forward and to sort of prosper in some way. And the gap in terms of education is really about using these instruments correctly, understanding the context for which we get feedback, and then applying it in the appropriate way. And in any endeavor, there's going to be feedback that doesn't work. But if we don't see the dashboard, if we've got our blinders on, then we're not going to be very good at driving our car. And in fact, we're going to probably not go very far at all. We're going to have a bad accident. And so imagine a world where we got no feedback. That would be really difficult to operate in. And so there, again, from our point of view, there is really no feedback. And what we're going to really expose, I think, is that, having the right systems in place, having the right context and the right training will really change how feedback is both delivered and used. So imagine a world where we didn't get feedback and the challenges we'd have, because right now if you look at sort of entrepreneur education, there's a lot of sort of protecting that goes on, and certainly in staff environments and student environments it's very much the same. But when we go out into the sort of air quote real world, customers don't hesitate to give us very direct and real feedback. Our employees don't hesitate to give us very direct and real feedback, or our supervisors don't. Our investors don't hesitate to give us real and direct feedback. And we need an environment, a training environment, a preparation environment that is safe and comfortable enough to both allow us to receive feedback and allow us to sort of internalize it and benefit from it. And so again, the idea that we can't sort of withhold this information, as much as we want to protect that baby duck, we have to get it in the water and get it swimming. And there's a way to sort of serve sort of both objectives, I think, both in terms of how do we protect this this fairly fragile being, and how do we give it experiences that move it forward in a way that is very effective. So I'm going to share two possible models with you that you may find helpful. So these are sort of feedback notions that are certainly I would guess some are using, but may be helpful for others. So one of the things we've noticed, particularly as we've gone around to college campuses, is we'll talk to the folks in the business school and who run the entrepreneurship program or the engineering program, and it'll be this sort of protection of the entrepreneur that happens. And then we'll go over to some of the other schools, particularly the creative parts of the university, and we'll talk to the folks who are running the art program or the architecture program and so on, or the music program. And the difference between how they look at feedback is like night and day, where sort of in one world there's a fair amount of protection and maybe I would even say over-nurturing. In the creative communities, they use a technique called critiquing. And critiquing in some schools is something like a blood sport. In others, it's a little more subtle, but it is always honest. It's always direct. And it is always varied in terms of the opinions that you'll get. And the training is partially about helping the individual do better on this particular work, but it's also about helping them evaluate inputs and helping them sort of learn to listen. And so critiquing is a very powerful method, and there are a lot of ways to use it. So that's one model to consider. The other model, from a sort of a mentor standpoint or a feedback, someone giving feedback standpoint, would be to be more Socratic. And what I mean by that is as the mentor has, or the person giving feedback has no answers. All they are allowed to do is ask questions. So it might be something like, have you thought of doing this? Have you ever tried that? Or what if you did this? Anything like that where it causes the individual to think. The challenge of a lot of educational programs can be that it's something where it's a one-way dialogue, and ultimately in a mentorship role or feedback role, one of the primary goals is usually to create independence, to get people to a place where they can stand on their own and evolve on their own and evolve quick in an accelerated way. And often the Socratic method can really help with that, so that number one, it sort of properly focuses the people who are giving feedback on that goal, but also very much reminds the person receiving the feedback that it's their responsibility to think and to apply these questions in a way that help them evolve whatever it is they're doing. And And ultimately, it may be even a mix of these two ideas that that evolve, sort of a best practice in terms of how to give feedback. So one of the other things we've seen, and this has happened quite often actually, is where the evaluation being done, or you might even think the criteria being used for an assessment, maybe it's at a pitch event, or maybe it's at at an innovation event of some kind or whatnot. But the criteria being used is often misaligned with the sort of the stage of where this particular set of people are. So I'll give you an example. I was at a university campus a couple of weeks ago, and we were at a very much an early stage event. These were just students were giving idea pitches, and they didn't. There was no team. It was just one student, and each one was giving these pitches, and they hadn't talked to any customers yet. They just had some ideas about, something that they might do, a product or service that they might create that would be interesting. And the evaluation that was being done, there was a few judges. The evaluation was being done was around, were these ideas scalable and fundable? And it just, the challenge was severalfold. Number one is the feedback made absolutely no sense to the students because they weren't that far evolved. And two, it was actually fairly discouraging for them to hear, because again their idea wasn't that evolved, to hear the evaluation, because it was just, they weren't that far down the track to really understand what it all meant, and they shouldn't have been expected to be that evolved in terms of their idea. So our suggestion is if you look at sort of any type of feedback system as having three stages, and these are just sort of our suggestions, would be, you've got an engagement stage where you're sort of getting people in and comfortable and familiar, and they're making the decisions whether or not to come back and to sort of more invest in the process. Then you get them into maybe a larger and longer stage that is a learn stage, where they're invested in going through some process of evolution. And then finally, as they sort of begin the exit process, there's an expectation of performance. And that might be, that the product goes to market, there are customers, there are all sorts of outcomes here. But if in the early stages the focus is more on the form, analogize this to if you're training, if you're an athlete or somebody getting into an exercise regime, you don't focus on how fast you're going or how much weight you're lifting. In the early part, you're focused on technique and much more about form. So if the early assessments in terms of feedback are around form, and as the individuals or the class or the cohort matures, then the assessment can evolve to a place more about substance. What are you actually getting done? What effect are you having? All of those types of things. What possibilities lie ahead? I think there are a lot of different sort of key criteria that evolve as the individuals mature, and that's really the idea, so that there's a matching of expectations and sort of stage. So suggested actions from this part are, number one, feedback needs to be honest, it needs to be transparent, and then it needs to be stage appropriate. And if you have that alignment, the idea of really getting to a place where it's much more aligned, much more valuable, really comes into play. So the next section is really talking about how do we deliver and receive feedback more effectively. So right now we see a lot of situations where it's both delivered and received. The feedback is both delivered and received poorly. And so talking about this, we tend to see a few different things. Number one is, if thinking about that sort of early example we gave where an individual is walking out after just having shared an idea and they catch one or two people on the way out and they get feedback, that can be very abstract and very difficult to process. And both because it's oral feedback and it's, sort of not contextual, but also the idea that we don't have any way to sort of compare one individual's feedback to another or even put one individual's feedback and to understand how to prioritize the different comments. And the other is that quite often the individual receiving the feedback is not ready to process it. They're not inviting it. They haven't sort of been trained in terms of how to listen and actually to ask more questions so that they can qualify feedback and make sure that they understand sort of and empathize with an individual's point of view. And so even if it's not this dramatic, the listening skills quite often of the mentee are not as good as they should be to be able to really effectively use all the feedback coming. So so we can quite often from that have, whether it's sort of poor delivery or poor receipt, we can often have a fairly confused individual who we otherwise had intended to really help, and that's obviously not where we want to go. So what we really see as an opportunity here is the idea that both the person delivering the feedback and the person receiving it needs to have a real understanding of the framework of the intent of this information and how to use it. So the idea that there's an orientation on the front end so that people understand exactly what's going to happen, and that there's a reminder orientation, if you will, for the people receiving it on the back end. And there are lots of ways to do this. We certainly see, and we actually have some video material that does this. We also certainly see a lot of efforts possible on the sort of front end in terms of, quick orientation meeting for judges or managers or whatnot, or faculty who would be doing reviewing, or certainly for students and entrepreneurs and staff, giving those orientations. And the more this is done, the more it becomes part of the muscle that where people are expecting and learning how to process feedback and them understanding that this feedback isn't a perfect process. Just like the gauges in our car aren't perfect. They don't all, they probably work better because they're mechanized, but there's no reason why we can't get feedback to a similar place in terms of what we do in terms of giving, from a mentor and a mentee standpoint, giving much more valuable and actionable feedback. So let's look at sort of one area where feedback is really well used, and that is in the area of athletics. And just as an example, we'll take a look at running. So people that run in road races, be that a 5K or a turkey trot or a marathon or whatever, they have an incredible wealth of information that allows them to perform both to their expectation and continue to improve. And so what's available for runners are sheets that look just like this. And for any running event in the world that happens, pretty much there are results online for those events. So whether you just competed or you're going to compete, this data is available for you to both understand how you did and how you could do and how you can prepare. So imagine if we all just ran in an event, and maybe we were just looking at the top group on this list. Maybe we were in the female group, age 35 to 39, and maybe let's just say we were Leah Barclay Marchetta. And so, Leah finished 7th in her group. So when she looks at these results, she knows how she did versus her own expectation. She can easily reference that, know how she did in terms of her pace, her time, her place in her age group, and so on. And actually it has her overall place as well. Now imagine that Leah has a friend who finished ahead of her. Maybe she knows Jennifer Carew or Sharon Cahill or Khalil. the opportunity for Leah to actually talk to Jennifer or Sharon and find out how they train, what do they do to prepare, maybe they can become training partners, but the idea that you can referentially begin to evolve is exceptionally powerful. Much more powerful than knowing how you did is knowing what better looks like, and the idea that you can begin modeling that behavior is exceptionally powerful. So the third way that this information is used, and possibly the most powerful, is before these runners went to this event. It is very likely, in fact, most runners, most athletes that we've talked to have told us nearly 100% of the time, before they go to any event, they look at previous, last year and the last few years' results for that event so that they know how to prepare, how to train to perform well. They know what this group is likely to perform at, or what level this group is likely to perform at, so that their preparation is very much in line with the performance that they want to have. And so if we sort of take this back to the feedback world, be it again in the classroom, in entrepreneurship and innovation, or in corporations, that doesn't exist. We essentially ask everybody going through school, through entrepreneurship and innovation, and through evolving in corporations, we ask them all to start at the beginning. And to us, it seems like the absolute craziest thing that there is no advancement because of past people that have gone through whatever it is we're going to be going through, and there's no ability to sort of learn from their learning or learn from their mistakes and to start again where sort of they finished, as opposed to starting at the beginning. And the opportunity for this is really dramatic, and we think could be very transformational. So modeling is a huge part of all of our lives. So having the ability to see and reference people who we can model is going to be a really important part of having a better feedback system. Standing on the shoulders of people who have gone before us, being able to come in at a higher level of performance than the previous cohort, the previous students, the previous staff, all key parts of stronger feedback systems. We don't need to start, feedback doesn't need to start when somebody needs guidance. It can start long before they enter the program. They can see how to avoid, again, some of the mistakes and pitfalls and perform much higher out of the gate. So the suggested actions from this part are really about, number one, having a strong orientation program. And for those that have orientation programs, it usually focuses on the mentor, the judge, or the staff member who's giving feedback. And we're suggesting that it both needs to be on that end, but also on the receiving end, and as much or more on the receiving end, because it's really about building the ability in the mentee, building their ability to listen. And it's not just about, good listening. Good empathic listening is about being passionately interested. It's about asking questions to qualify understanding. It may even include restating so that you understand somebody's point of view. But it's really making sure that individuals know how to process and action feedback that really makes the process quite a bit different. Having reference points. I'm a sailor, and we think of waypoints. Certainly people that navigate ships or fly planes understand the idea of waypoints, but the point is these are all, be it reference points or waypoints, are indicators of progress, and being able to see who is ahead of us, ways to model them, and so on, are really key. And the more we can see live examples of what better looks like, the quicker we evolve. And the idea that, kind of final idea here, is the idea that we can democratize feedback, the idea that more people or our whole community can gain from the feedback that's being given at sort of at any given time. There's generally nothing that's proprietary about feedback we we haven't seen anything yet. In all the feedback that our tools have been used to deliver, we haven't seen anything yet that compromises anyone. And that, you certainly could obscure, if there are concerns, could obscure either venture names or individual names or whatnot. But the feedback itself, to know, that the person that was first or the idea that was selected, this is why they were selected, and all the other ideas, kind of why they weren't selected, or the second, third, fourth, and fifth, why they weren't successful is really important. I'll share one other quick story with you on this topic in particular. So we were at a business accelerator that had a very large pitch event. They had 60 individuals give 1-minute business idea pitches. And at the end of it, they identified the top 3 pitches. And the challenge of this was, we went up, and this is kind of a normal thing that we do at these type of events, is after the event was over, we went up to the people that were first, second, and third, and we asked them a question. We said, hey, congratulations, you were first. Can you tell us why you won? And they had no idea. They couldn't in any way guess as to why they won. And we did it with the person who was second and the person who was third. It was the same thing, and we've since repeated this, and it's been very consistent. And then we went to the, as many as of the people who were somewhere between 4th and 60th as we could, and we said, hey, do you know how you did? And they said no. And so, okay, so these people had no idea whether they were close to being good or in the top 3, or if they were way at the back end and not anywhere close. And also we asked them, hey, do you know what the first or second or third place folks did that you didn't do? And they had no idea. And you think of this potential energy, and that's really what feedback is potential energy. And no matter what community you're in, again, be it in a corporation, an accelerator, incubator, or in a school, feedback from your community and in your community is potential energy, and not sharing it, it's unapplied. It can't move to that kinetic state unless it's shared. And the more it's shared, the more possibilities it can create. So the questions, I want to make sure that we've sort of addressed the questions that were posed, and you should see some form of a question you asked here. We kind of combined several. We had about 20 or 30 questions that came in. So these should hit, I think, pretty much everything that was asked, and we'll have certainly it looks like a few minutes at the end here to ask any other questions. So the first question was, delivering feedback how do you deliver feedback when constructive suggestions will be resisted? And, hopefully we talked and it was understood that really the best way to do this is that anyone receiving feedback needs orientation, they need education, they need training about how to both listen and learn from feedback. And it doesn't really matter, nothing else matters until that happens. Periodically we'll hear students who will say, I couldn't learn anything because of the professor. Well, the professor didn't keep you from reading your book. The professor didn't keep you from doing the activities that would cause you to learn. They were, had they been better, maybe it would have been a better experience for you, but they didn't tell you can't learn. And, there are all sorts of other resources, and it's sort of the same thing with feedback. Just because feedback is poorly delivered doesn't mean the message shouldn't be heard. And so the biggest gains can be made by making sure the receiver is prepared to hear and that they're interested in the information coming. If they're not, it doesn't matter what else you change because it's going to be a waste of time. So let's see, how to begin when the presentation is significantly lacking without discouraging the presenter. One of the terms I've heard, I think many times now in several feedback environments is the idea of lovingly critical feedback. And so, sure, we want to position and frame our feedback in a way that is thoughtful, and that's absolutely the intent. And I guess my experience says that we could do that, and we should do that. But even if we do that really well, every once in a while, somebody's not going to hear it that way, and they're going to take what we say as being challenging and as being sort of somehow negative towards their baby, their idea. And so, again, I kind of come back to the idea that, this sort of begins with making sure that the receiver is prepared to hear and to listen. And in most organizations that we visit, there isn't a lot of attention paid to that. And again, I think that's really a huge area of opportunity. So let's see here. How to help the mentees interpret feedback correctly? We didn't copy and paste very well there. So how to help the mentees interpret feedback correctly? Training, definitely. I think we probably talked enough about that. How to keep mentors from imposing their solutions? Certainly using the Socratic method, not allowing mentors to do anything but ask questions. They can't make statements. They can only ask questions. It's a great way to avoid that. And it's a huge cultural change, because if you see the mentors starting to do that, you'll actually see the mentees, be it, again, staff, entrepreneurs, students, they'll begin treating their peers that way as well. They won't give ideas, they'll ask questions. You'll see quite an evolution in terms of the people you're working with and in terms of how they treat each other if you go to that type of a system. Let's see, how do you use feedback to develop stronger teams? There may be a variety of ways here, and there's some of these questions, I kind of have questions for whoever asked that, because there may be a lot of ways to sort of interpret that question, but certainly one way that comes to mind is to track change. So if you begin sort of looking or taking or benchmarking progress, looking at change and being able to see what teams are evolving and what teams are not. The idea that you could begin supplementing team members, you could begin doing specialized content for certain teams, or maybe even have certain teams pair and work together, because you can match strengths with weaknesses and make the whole better. There seem to be a lot of opportunities there, but I think one would be certainly looking at change over time, looking at progress, and having a way to sort of measure change. And then the idea of peer review is another. The idea that if you're looking at sort of that critiquing style, where you could do peer critiquing, you can do common role between teams critiquing. So we're going to have the people that are sort of the engineers within a few teams work together so that they develop the engineering or technical skills quickly. We're going to have the people that are doing the selling and customer-facing activities. We're going to have them kind of come together and so that they can learn from each other. And again, sort of more of a matrix approach, so that you're getting multiple types of feedback, both in terms of how the idea or the venture or the team project is progressing, but also how the role-specific individual and parts of the team are progressing as well. And I think, again, there are a variety of ways to sort of do this. So let's see, the next question. With multiple judges or panelists, how do we coordinate and communicate feedback to presenters? I think there are a variety of ways here. From our standpoint and what we've learned, that any way you do it is going to be better than not doing it. Let's start there. Second is sort of the most preferred would be in a contextual way, so that individuals can look at a sort of a grid system and easily determine how they did on each of the criteria and what comments relate to that, and also how they did versus their peers would be really, really helpful, again, so that they have those references. And even ideally before they came to this whatever event or whatnot, so that they could either look at their history in terms of what they've done in the past or what previous participants have done in the past and how and what kind of critiquing has happened again, so that they're not starting at the beginning. So they're starting much more advanced than they would have otherwise. This is something, if for those that are particularly interested in this topic and really any of this, we do have some tools that address this in a really high-functioning way and help deliver strong contextual feedback that is both transparent and actionable to sort of, again, be it students, mentors, or staff, and we'd certainly be happy to talk more about that. So let's see, we have about 10 minutes left. Oh yeah, forgot. So bring this thing full circle. The whole goal and what we were aiming to really satisfy today is the idea that good feedback, the best feedback, should happen long before anyone asks for money. We don't have to wait for that point anymore, and in fact, we're going to progress whomever we're working with much quicker if we build a feedback system that exposes them to all feedback as quickly as possible. And again, as you do that, the feedback gets better and better, and the ability to read and interpret the feedback gets better and better. This is, for all of us, an iterative and incremental process. We're, certainly very, very excited that you all were with us today. We do have I can see we've got a great number of people on the call and on the phone, and we're excited about that. I did mention that we have a couple of tools that help in terms of feedback, and we're more than happy to talk to anyone after about it. We have Test My Pitch, which operates a lot like if you took the sort of notion of Toastmasters and made it virtual. We have the Test My Pitch platform that does that, essentially helps individuals improve their communication skills within a safe and collegial community that is very controllable and discreet. And then second is Score My Pitch, which is a pitch event judging and feedback system. So both tools, one, Test My Pitch gets people prepared for live communication, and again, could be in the school, accelerator, incubator, or corporate or enterprise environment. And then Score My Pitch, which actually takes the wisdom in the room at live pitch events and captures and contextualizes it to be able to deliver feedback. So this is how we're sort of developing this knowledge on this topic, and it's certainly evolving as we go, and certainly we expect conversations that we have with you all after this to continue to inform our knowledge, but we're really beginning to see a lot of neat opportunities with feedback and about evolving individuals and teams and ventures to a place that is much more accelerated than many have been able to do so far. So again, we're happy to help anyone, and we really appreciate you all tuning in today. And just so you all know, we will be probably within a couple of days making this available electronically. We'll post it and send out a link to you all with this webinar if you would like to share it with anyone or would like to review it. So thanks so much. Give us a holler with any questions, and we hope you all have a great rest of the day. Thank you.